Test. Testing. Test. Here we go. Okay. Audio is good. Hey, welcome, Jim. Good to see you.
Hey, Scott. Good to see you. Welcome back home, man. Even
Thank
if you've been
you.
home for a bit.
Yeah, it still feels like I just was away. I dig the new avatar.
Buzz says hello, by the way.
Oh, nice. So glad that
thank
you're
you, yeah.
made it to the stream. Welcome, Fuzz. Welcome, Bonnie. I had a momentary panic. I couldn't figure out my my audio, like my microphone wasn't coming through, and it was because my kind of noise management filter wasn't pointed at the right microphone. So I was glad for a little time to debug that before we got started. Yeah, we'll just give it a few minutes for, I know a couple more people are coming, so I'll let them spawn in. This was one of those starts for me where just everything technical had a little bit of an adventure. I put my headset on and the image was nothing but this like pink static. I was like, okay. So thankfully just the normal restart of the computer like fixed that. And I think one of my sensors might be offline because when I turn, like I lose my hands. And I already mentioned the microphone bit too. Welcome, Haya.
Yeah. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah. How does my voice come across to you? Is not like overpowering or squelchy or anything? Is it comfortable?
It's a little loud, but it's okay. I'll just turn you down.
Let me see if I could actually just dial it down, because
see if just everybody's loud, because I just heard Jim and I was like, wait, that's loud too.
Oh, how's that? I put myself down a little bit.
That works for me.
Is that good for everyone? I just want to make sure that my voice isn't like squelchy and reverberating. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, if we get going and it magic of VR, you know, we can turn our audio tools up and down. And I've had people close friends comment that they almost wish they had the VR audio adjustments like in real life. Like if you could go to the grocery store and turn on earmuff mode, so you only hear like what's 5 feet away from you. Yeah, maybe someday. But welcome, Tom. Good to see you. I'm glad you could make it too.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead and get started. It looks like folks can hear us okay too, so thanks for confirming on the stream. Yeah, welcome to another event of The Body Keeps the Score book review, our weekly get-together to explore the wisdom and knowledge in the book The Body Keeps the Score. And I always want to take a moment to just thank everyone for their time. Time's a valuable commodity, and sometimes we dedicate it to work or tasks around the house. But I really feel fortunate that you've decided to dedicate it to hanging out in VR and talking about such an important topic. So thanks for setting aside this time. It means a lot to me. I learn a lot from it, and I hope that's reciprocal. And to make sure that we maintain, a safe learning and sharing space, we have some norms that we follow for the event. One of which is, we don't replace therapy here. We talk about therapeutic topics, but, we're not like professional therapists offering advice or diagnosis. We can't write prescriptions. So sorry about that. But all joking aside, if you are facing some difficulties or our topics here bring up some thoughts that you want to explore, please by all means reach out to a professional for some counseling. I can speak from my personal experience. It's been helpful for me, so I hope that's an option and that's open to you. Let's avoid any fixing or advising. Sometimes we might get some shares in here. It's our instincts to want to reach out and help. But it's also good to just let something breathe and let somebody share and be heard and be seen without having to pull in a bunch of immediate feedback on advice and anecdotes. Let's let those comments kind of have some space, and but on the flip side, if you are open to advice and what people have faced on their own, or some wisdom, some encouragement, please say so. With your share, that you would like some feedback. I and you statement hygiene. I feel this goes a long way. Sometimes when you're in a vulnerable state, you statements feel judgmental and threatening. So, hearing some feedback like you said this, it almost feels, like an accusation even though it's totally unintended. So, phrasing that as like, I think what I heard you say, or I think what I understood, kind of softens it a bit when it's a close personal share. We are confidential here to the degree that we can be. We do broadcast this to YouTube and Discord for a wider reach. We hope that we're able to reach additional audiences that come in via streaming or watch later. So to extend that accessibility, we are on YouTube, so we don't have complete confidentiality here, but we're not trying to collect information in any way to share and create gossip or shame in any way like that. So I hope we create a space that does feel open to that kind of personal shares. And for discussion management too, we got kind of a first in, first out hand raise system. If you click the squirrel picture up in the right, and we'll also kind of keep an eye on the chat window too if anyone's streaming or on Discord. So we can hear from you there, and like to see little comments coming in from the streams as well. And also, don't forget you can lower your hand if you change your mind. So yeah, you had a share, and then you're like, yeah, maybe next time. Feel free to lower your hand too. No pressure. And also, we do have a Discord channel where we do have weekly discussions outside of events. So it's kind of exciting to have, a whole community to chat with. Take a 10 or 15-minute work break, grab something to eat, and catch up on messages or shoot a interesting question into the chat. So yeah, just some thoughts there on the community and the event norms. So here we go. Let's dive into chapter 9. The body keeps the score with Dr. Vanderkolk here. One of the themes of this chapter is, we've paved the way on a lot of very personal, especially chapter 8 stories of childhood and developmental trauma. And previous to that, Dr. Vanderkolk points out so many studies, many of which he participated in himself, to show the different body mechanisms that hold traumatic experiences and create these kind of activation and reaction and overstimulus kind of challenges. So we have the science down. We've heard lots of personal stories of how this can impact people's lives from childhood all the way into adulthood, and the kind of things people face. And what we get into in chapter 9 and kind of ongoing is a little bit of condemnation from Dr. Vanderkolk on where the current system is kind of stuck, and how it can actually be kind of unhelpful sometimes to patients that do reach out for help. And welcome, KT. I'm also glad that you could make it. That's good to see you. So the chief kind of complaint in the opening is that many diagnoses and you reach out for help and see a counselor, and it's like the response is always just like, let's medicate, let's diagnose it and medicate. And to give some examples of that, there's these different diagnoses that people fall into. They kind of put you in a bucket where if you're experiencing emotional highs and lows, that'll be diagnosed as bipolar, and here's the mood stabilizers to treat that. And a really popular one is lithium. And if you ever needed or any confirmation that Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, had a bipolar diagnosis, one of the songs that he wrote was actually called Lithium. And, it has a lot of themes that might be recognizable to somebody who has bipolar, like kind of weird reactions to feelings, like, I'm so lonely, that's okay, I shaved my head. Or, what's another one here? Let's see. I'm so excited, I can't wait to meet you there, but I don't care. Like these kind of mutually exclusive feelings. And, there was another one that was like really telling, is the very beginning of the song. He says, like, I'm so happy because today I found my friends. They're in my head. And what I kind of take away from that is she's experiencing this over exuberance of that feeling like when you're going on a night out with friends, and just the excitement and the all the connection and activity, but it's all in his head. There's no one even there. So it's like the bipolar highs that you can get, a lot of people associate these feelings with like depression and sadness. Well, bipolar can be extreme, like euphoric highs where you feel like you could take on the world and then it flips and you can't get out of bed. So that's the handwritten page that Kurt wrote the song on. So we explore songs and music and art and feeling in another event on Bridgemakers called the Music Hop, which is ran and hosted by Mary. And wow, like mind-blowing revelations on songs that you've maybe heard 100 times, and then you're just like, wow, I never really realized like that was in the song. So yeah, check it out if you do have an interest in the connection there. And hi Fogo, I'm also so glad to see you come in, and Fuzz, you were able to make it into VR. So happy to see you here too. So yeah, if you come into counseling and you end up kind of diagnosed with depression, you express a lot of despair, here comes the antidepressants like Zoloft. Restlessness or difficulty concentrating, of course, that's ADHD, and here comes the central nervous system stimulant, Ritalin. Borderline personality disorder, where you just kind of erratically react to things and unpredictably. Well, that's going to be an antipsychotic like Klonopin. And if you are kind of fortunate enough to have a doctor recognize PTSD, that's probably a doctor that has like an exorbitant amount of skill in recognizing these symptoms and may not be easy to find. But on top of that, you also have to be let me rephrase that. Like the ability to describe the symptoms and experience, like, is also part of the equation that the doctor needs to reach that diagnosis. So, like, you almost have to be lucky as a patient, to describe it in a way that the doctor can recognize. And we also have like all these barriers to care where, like we just kind of talked about, the knowledge and the values of the practitioner are at play here. You might be in a territory that the doctor's not experienced or is familiar with. And, maybe that'll lead to a diagnosis that's close, but like not on the mark. But here's a big one, the industrialization of care, what insurance covers. So, what if you do get an accurate diagnosis, but it falls into, a gravity well of something that the insurance provider like doesn't consider to covered care, or it's not in network. If we have anyone watching from, over the pond, they might not recognize these challenges, but these are the nightmares of the American healthcare system, where insurance providers, for-profit insurance providers, kind of decide what types of care are available. Also, once you do get a specific DSM diagnosis, like we talked about as an example, ADHD, that narrows the treatment option. So now the doctor is constrained to prescribe medications and treatments that are applicable to ADHD only. But if you think about that, like if you're facing something like a PTSD, that has multiple threads of these challenges, now your doctor is only focused on this one area of a symptom that you're displaying. And this is kind of something interesting to think about too, like the DSM diagnosis grouping, that narrows research funding. So, Dr. Vanderkolk struggles to get research funding because he's always exploring things that are like outside of these specific DSM diagnoses. So it's like it constrains what's being studied, like how PTSD, gets funding versus some specific insurance coverage backed, specific diagnosis of a symptom that they can treat with a medication, might get preference over, adverse childhood experience type of research. academic programs also, they're totally based on DSM, and what's covered and agreed upon in that book. But this one kind of heard a little bit reading in the book too, which is the labeling. So when you seek help and you're with a professional and that professional diagnoses you with ADHD, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's only part of the story, but like forever now you're like labeled with this "I have ADHD." And the kind of implications of that the personal meaning of what does that now mean, that I'm at ADHD, have this disorder. And this one wasn't in the book, but it just kind of occurred to me as like the DSM reinforcement in fiction. It's like authors can take something like a depression or dissociative disorder and sort of just amp it up to 1,000, and that's your character. So now you have this character that's kind of just coming out of the pages of a DSM, and can be a little bit one-dimensional in that way too. So Dr. Vanderkolk, he had this wonderful way of describing how trauma sort of manifests in someone's behavior is that you develop nuanced talents through these creative energies that are developed for your survival. You're sort of going through life doing these nervous system gymnastics to navigate the cards that you're dealt, the hand that you're dealt, and the recognition that it's not a disorder, but it came, from experience, that, it's really what happened and not what's wrong. And, our current systems of diagnoses kind of really focus on the symptoms and what's wrong as opposed to how did we get here. And these are the sort of, the ways your nervous system adjusts that sort of go along with these diagnoses. Like ADHD is this hyper awareness of, elevating your nervous system to a point of chronic excitement, so that you can keep an awareness of your environment at all times, kind of like an eyes in the back of your head sort of superpower, because, you've probably needed to keep an awareness of threats that are all around you at all times. And, anxiety disorders could lead to overworking or an always on state. And yeah, I thought, Tanya, had an interesting contribution too, which is can too much positive be a form of trauma? And I kind of been thinking about that as if you have a caregiver that's kind of always showering you with these in words of encouragement, almost overly so, do you get kind of addicted to that feedback, and now you're kind of overachieving to continually connect with that stream of positive feedback? And we tend to think of trauma as abuse and neglect and abandonment, but almost too much positive reinforcement could potentially cause a type of nervous system reprogramming in itself. And if you have that kind of people-pleasing mentality, going into the corporate world, you'll just get assigned projects to the nth degree. You'll have 10 projects when your coworkers have one, because they know that you'll rise to the occasion. But the cost is at the burnout of your nervous system in order to maintain that pace and that level of productivity. Depression is more of a shutdown state, where we're overwhelmed and we don't feel like we can defeat the situation. So we just start to kind of shut down and wait the situation out. Dissociation, we talked about that in the previous chapter. These incredibly emotional and moving drawings where people are disconnecting from themselves, having like out of body experience to survive. But Dr. van der Kolk's theory is kind of like, what if instead of medication to sort of numb these systems down and make it easier to be productive, because that's like the ultimate goal, right? Is like everybody feels worried because you're not productive. So let's numb these systems down so that you can function and contribute to the GDP. But what if we instead approached it as like this mindful recognition that these survival behaviors, they aren't necessary anymore because you've exited the threat situation, the threatening situation, and that's where you get kind of stuck in a trauma cycle. Is you've grown and you've learned to protect yourself, and now you're self-sufficient, but we still have these survival mechanisms like firing and these coping mechanisms, and it sort of takes this mindful presence of learning to recognize that, but not just the recognition, but how do you steer like to a more centered and grounded level when that the threat is gone. And that obviously you can't do that when you're still under fire. That's where we have to go back to Winston Churchill. If you're going through hell, keep going. But once you do get through hell, how can like community serve as a way to remind you like, oh, now the threat is lessened and it's no longer, surrounding, like how do we wind that nervous system back to a place where, life feels comfortable and joyful and, not so overly painful and dramatic. Help reconnecting with emotions. That was a big revelation in the last couple of chapters too, which is how you can sort of dissociate from your emotions and become just a creature of habit and action, and to sort of dull down or deny the feelings. There's that colloquialism of like pushing a feeling down, like you don't belong here. You can't come up that way. And these healing processes that Dr. van der Kolk advocates, like just reconnecting to those emotions. I think the patient that he talked about in the last chapter, I think he did a lot of work with that patient to bring those emotions, back to the surface and reconnect. But also just being seen, heard, and validated, like when you're in a traumatic situation, if it's abuse or neglect, you're probably not being seen and heard. So, some people maybe for the first time going into a counseling are having their experience validated, decades after it's happened. And even that can be a healing experience. Another part of the healing process that community can bring too. So Dr. van der Kolk describes all of this in the wonderful ways that he sort of makes information so efficient as the diagnosis chasm, which is the doctors sort of like focus in on like one detail of what you're facing, and then the DSM like narrows the types of treatments that'll be available to you. But, of course, the problems with that is these are just visible symptoms, visible symptoms of a much more complex life experience that led to that state of the nervous system. So, these coping behaviors and the way that the nervous system got reprogrammed for all of this dysregulation, drugs may help even out that, that stress, that strain on the body and the mind. But to really get at the long-term like quality of life, it's like, how do we unpack where did those coping mechanisms and symptoms come from? Because a lot of times it gets pointed as genetics, or it's in our genes, but I think Dr. van der Kolk goes to great lengths to try to show that it can also, or maybe even more so, come from experience. And we get into a lot of that in chapter 10 as well. So he kind of asks this really important question in the book. But yeah, I'm noticing Carl put something in our chat too. I just want to check in on that. I'm currently trying to give the impression of reliability at my job while also not becoming that guy that gets everything piled on me. Oh man, yeah, brothers at work here. It's happened too much in the past. I often wonder how different I would be if I had been diagnosed with something as a kid. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. And kind of what comes to mind for me is like one of my biggest struggles in life is like setting boundaries for myself, and that's tough at a workplace because what's one of the biggest aspects of setting a boundary is the ability to say no, right? So, and in that people-pleasing propensity to overwork, you can find yourself overwhelmed in a workplace because, it's not a bad personality trait to want to be productive and helpful, but what's difficult is a workplace doesn't always focus in on the balance that their workers need. They just focus on the accomplishments, the goals, the timelines. So when they find somebody that's willing to take on 4 or 5 projects, when a human being probably can only handle 1 or 2 at a time, they really see a positive in that, but they'll never stop and consider like how much is this person burning out to keep that pace. So yeah, thanks for bringing that aspect in, Carl, because I think that's maybe a struggle that doesn't get talked about a lot, and I've seen it come up a couple of times in our group here, so I think it's worth kind of going back into whenever it comes to mind. So yeah, Dr. van der Kolk, he asked this really big fundamental question, which is, how can you get traumatic history? So, we've identified the problem that we're diagnosing symptoms instead of the underlying experience. But after that thought exercise, it kind of occurred to him, how do you get somebody's trauma experience? And he started having talks with Judith Herman, who also has quite a few books on trauma. And they collaborated to kind of, explore this. And, one of the things that Judith brought to the table is she was starting to recognize that all of the people, that she was engaged with in learning, what their challenges were, that coincidentally, they all seemed to come from these terrible childhoods. So when she heard of Dr. van der Kolk's work, naturally there was a collaboration there. And, her patients and the hospital that she worked in mainly handled what's called BPD, which is borderline personality disorder. That's the really erratic reaction to environmental stimulus, very unpredictable, difficult for everybody involved, but of course a totally understandable reaction when you go through that person's history. So they further linked the experience of these terrible childhoods and having borderline personality disorder to, these extreme mood swings and self-injury and suicide attempts, orders of magnitude beyond what the baseline is for people with behavioral disorders. And so what they did was they submitted for funding to the National Institute of Mental Health, to research, is there a link between childhood trauma and borderline personality disorder? And it's like, you think of it now and it's like, well, case closed, right? But actually they came back as a rejection for that funding, because they just didn't see the necessity to explore if there was this link. So, Dr. Vanderkolk and Judith did, their fundraising, and they went ahead and did the study anyways because they really wanted to answer this question. So they self-funded it. So yeah, how do you get people to share, what happened? It's the age-old what's wrong versus what happened, and then they're exploring this what happened aspect of trauma. So he kind of jokes in the book that you can't just go up to somebody and say, were you molested or were you beaten? That's probably a conversation that is gonna get shut down at any level of normalcy. So what they found is that if they inquire about really important aspects of childhood, and almost in a way like general family life, right? Like, so if you think of a question like, where do you live? Where did you live? Who pays the bills? Who paid the bills? Who cooks and cleans? These are going to uncover, is there like a primary caregiver, right? Who do you rely on? Who do you talk to when you're upset? Who lived in your childhood home? Was there people outside of your family? Like, did you live in a foster home type of situation? Who is your primary caregiver? Did they treat you special? This one broke my heart too. Was there anyone you felt safe with growing up? 1 out of 4 people could not answer. 25% of the respondents couldn't say yes. Oh man. Who enforced the rules in your home? How were the rules enforced? How did parents solve disagreements? That's an important one right there. Did they have discussions? Did they compromise? Or did they, start flinging things? And what came out of these questions were, things like, I came home to an empty house, or I saw one of my parents, beat each other. One person answered that for their caregiver, they had to steady the wheel while they drove drunk. Actually, can you imagine as a 6 or 8-year-old needing to reach over and grab the steering wheel because your parents too drunk to drive down the highway? It's just how do you get these stories in a clinical situation? And this style of survey turned out to be a way to kind of open that door for people to tell their stories, about who were their primary caregivers growing up, and how were they cared for. So after this study, there was another person that kind of got involved, Chris Perry, who was the Cambridge director of research, and he came in as an absolute skeptic. Like the DSM is like what we need to move forward. We don't need to explore these connections. It's all genetics. But after these results came back, he's quoted as saying, without understanding the language of trauma and abuse, you cannot understand BPD. A complete 180. He saw the results and clearly realized that traumatic experiencing is very much connected to borderline personality disorder. 81% of the respondents from this hospital that specialized in BPD reported a severe history of abuse. before the age of 7. And it was the beginning of shifting some focus from the symptom diagnosis and acute, terrible experiences to the long-term chronic, as he described it, brutalization and its impact on the nervous system. Also started to discover which therapies are effective for self-injury and suicide attempts. They were able to access Chris Perry's database to kind of follow up on patients, and after 3 years of therapy to kind of explore childhood experiences, versus individual diagnoses and medication, 2/3 of the patients had a significant improvement. So that was really positive that they were able to kind of help with the challenges that those people were facing. 1/3 of the patients who remained self-destructive were the ones that couldn't answer if they ever felt safe with anyone. Like look at that connection, right? 1/3 of the patients who didn't respond positively to the additional treatments, they were the ones that had nobody caring for them when they grew up. And the most important key factor that they learned was that if at any point in your life you had a safe person, that the therapy could sort of reconnect with that feeling, with that trust in the world that there can be, somebody that cares. So, we talked about that a little bit in our last event, the mentoring, or, if you can just be one stable moment in a developing child's environment, like Mr. Miyagi or Peter Parker's Aunt May, if you can just show them, one moment of peace and support, that might be the moment that they reconnect with when they ultimately, do find help. So it's, as I always say, like the nicest thing you've ever done in your life is probably something you don't even remember doing. So the question kind of comes up is, do we need a new category or some way of sort of breaking out PTSD? Because at the time the book was written, PTSD was mostly described as like combat veterans, first responders, accident victims, victims of crime. And there was this kind of idea of this new category where dissociative and unremembered traumas, like we saw from Mary in chapter 8, like she didn't even recognize her childhood as abusive. That's how far like the disconnection, between mind and body went, was that she had very much trouble like remembering even the childhood that all the abuse happened in. And, these kind of unremembered traumas, driving these continual feelings of unsafeness. So in DSM-4, there was a PTSD group that performed a study, and they found these 3 symptomatic categories where you could kind of divide the type of PTSD, and that was victims of childhood sexual abuse, had one very specific path in life. Victims of recent domestic abuse had another, and victims of natural disasters, had this kind of different, but equally, challenging path in front of them. But what you look at in those 3 categories is like, could the treatment be different? Can the approach be different? Can the focus of the healing process, be different in those different categories? And they petitioned for a new type of PTSD called complex PTSD. And this would open up the treatment that we've been talking about, which is the focus on the experience, instead of the symptomatic focus that we, experience a lot in mental health care. But ultimately, DSM-4 didn't include complex PTSD, and that leaves these options. If you go to a counselor, they can diagnose you as depression, panic disorder, bipolar, borderline personality, any one of kind of a handful of these very specified disorders. And even went as far as to say is, are we at the level of denial that we faced, in the 1980s with PTSD and combat veterans? Like, are we at that inflection point with developmental, childhood complex PTSD? Are we at that inflection point that we saw in the 80s with combat veterans and their difficulty in finding care? So this really important question kind of keeps coming back, which is, how does a newborn baby, like born with all of this innocence and life and hope, grow up to be, a homeless alcoholic? And there's a fellow named Vincent Felitti, who is the chief preventative medicine director in San Diego at an obesity clinic, and he sort of accidentally discovered this correlation that morbidly obese patients under his care also had childhood abuse. So he started this larger study called Adverse Childhood Experiences, partnered with Robert Anda. And they basically added 10 additional questions to the form, the intake form at his obesity clinic, and 17,000 of their patients volunteered to fill it out. This early study was very limited to a largely middle-aged white demographic, because it's mainly people with health insurance that actually covers weight management, which, I think if I took a poll, how many of us could get into a weight management program with our current insurance? Most of our U.S. citizens here would probably, kind of chuckle at the idea. So these are, privileged, mostly only professional people, because our society is still broken and needs work. But only 1/3 of 17,000 people reported no to their 10-question adverse childhood experience. 1 in 10 answered they're often or very often were subject to verbal abuse from their primary caretaker. 1 out of 8 answered often or very often to witnessing domestic violence. 25% said yes to a parent would often push or slap or throw something at them that would leave a mark. And 28%, and interestingly enough, 16% of men, this is an aspect of PTSD that doesn't, I think, often come up, is that, young boys, young men are also subject to this answer of did somebody, an adult or 5 years or older, touch them or ask to be touched in a sexual way. So what came out of this is, through Dr. Vanderkolk's research and Judith Herman and Vincent Felitti and Robert Nada, kind of all of these minds came together and were kind of discovering the same thing at the same time. And what came out of that was this official Adverse Childhood Experiences quiz. And this is just a free 10-question questionnaire online that you can fill out, and it gives you a score, out of 1 to 10, how many adverse experiences did you have as a child. And if you're curious about taking the quiz too, Dr. Nadine Brooke Harris has this wonderful TED Talk on adverse childhood experiences, and it really goes very deep into the connection of your adverse childhood experience score and the connection to different kinds of physical disease and ailments that can sort of connect to it. 87% of the people that took the quiz were a 2 or more, and 1 in 6 people were a 4 or higher. The lower amount of 1s kind of shows that, trauma doesn't kind of happen like in an isolated incident, right? Like you probably don't have like an abusive caregiver that's not also, committing acts of domestic violence, so it's very uncommon to get a 1. Maybe if your parents divorced, but, there was really no other strife in your life other than that divorce, like you could get a 1. But, for the most part, trauma doesn't really happen in isolated incidences like that. So if you're going to score, probably score, 2 or higher. And, there's some correlations here that Dr. Nadine starts talking about, which is, scores of 4 or higher correlate to higher workplace absences, higher incidences of financial problems, lower overall lifetime income, chronic depression in adulthood, 66% higher chance for women and 35% higher chance for men. And that's probably, what's the math there? 31% of men that just never go to a counselor. Suicide rates increase, 7 times more likely to become an alcoholic. And that's at the score of 4. And if you compare zeros to people who scored 6 or higher, you have a 15% higher chance of suffering from one of the top 10 leading causes of death, one of those like heart disease or cancer, 2 times more likely to suffer from a cancer. I'm starting to see more and more connections to the cancer in general being tied to adverse childhood experience. And 4 times more likely to come down with emphysema. So it kind of begs the question, is childhood abuse actually the world's biggest public health problem? The Robert Anda had this kind of wonderful quote, adversity creates risk for problems. And I like that because, we often sort of romanticize facing adversity. And that's what I was meaning with Churchill's comment. Like, if you're going through hell, keep going. Like, you can almost take that as like this prideful defiance of adverse experiences. But I prefer to think of it as just keep moving because you don't want to stay in a tough situation. But, this is the opposite of that. Robert Anda is acknowledging the pragmatic reality of having an adverse experience, like opens you up for even more risk. So, what if we eliminated childhood, child abuse? I can't help but giggle because I just know human nature too much. But like in the Willy Wonka world, for the moment, let's just say we've achieved this miraculous, eradication of all child abuse across the world. It would completely cut societal costs from cancer and heart disease. Not saying that we wouldn't have cancer and heart disease, but what would it drop? Like 50%, 60%? Eliminating cases of depression by more than half. I mean, can we imagine a world where suddenly half the people that are depressed aren't? Alcohol abuse down by 2/3. I'm sure Anheuser-Busch doesn't want to hear that. Suicide, drug use, domestic violence, all of these like kind of public health crisis that don't really, normally see efforts to, do anything but kind of react to, like down 75%. Imagine what that would do to our workplace productivity. If you want to sell this to the politicians, like how much GDP do you gain when 50% of the people that are, being hospitalized for depression are suddenly no longer facing that? And a decrease in incarceration. This might be one of the single biggest gains on this whole board. Because our justice system is so punitive and so hard to reform from once you get nabbed into it, and getting into it can be just such a random circumstance, and of course very systemically unfair. So, imagine this decrease. We have evidence of countries, that have big social contracts for healthcare and mental health and work-life balance, and their incarceration rates are thousands of percent smaller than ours. So there's just huge benefits here to us finding ways, to reach children that are in these abusive situations, and also for the surviving adults to find the care to kind of heal and begin restructuring their nervous system to a more comfortable lifestyle. And our inspiration for the day is behavior is the language of trauma. And I kind of want to say that again because I feel that's so impactful. Behavior is the language of trauma. Children will show you before they tell you that they are in distress. Just so true. And with that, let's go ahead and open the floor for some discussion. I really appreciate you letting me kind of go long on that. There was a lot of data in Chapter 9. But really looking forward to hearing any thoughts or shares that might have come up with that. And we got Haya up on the board first. Let me get the camera over to you.
Yeah, hey. Quite a packed presentation. There's a lot of good data there. Thank you. And I think that couple of things. One, it was kind of silly and funny, but I saw that you had Khaleesi from Game of Thrones there as one of the characterological exaggerations of a diagnosis. And I've heard, but I totally have forgotten what the pathology for Khaleesi was considered. Was it narcissism, or do you remember?
It's a tough one for me because I really struggle with what they did with the character. It did not fit the arc I thought that she was on. So it's almost like it misconstrues maybe what the character's psychological profile really is, because I felt destroying King's Landing was actually outside of her personality. But what do you think, though? Your guess is narcissistic personality disorder?
That's what people go for any leader that has a kind of cold mentality towards people that they're supposed to care about. But, there's the estimate that I don't think was done by psychologists, but that most CEOs have some high ratings of psychopathic personality symptoms, because they have to make these continual decisions and objectify human beings, and they only thrive in that work if they really don't have some average level of empathy. So, and I don't know that I even agree with that, but I saw it up there and I was I do remember reading something where I think early in Khaleesi's journey, people were trying to diagnose what she was representing, but I didn't know if you had a specific title. And I agree. I think that the flip at the end, the jaw-dropping moment where she destroys everything, in one respect could be kind of a cartoonized version of what trauma does to us, that, she's been on this trajectory of bearing all this pain and judgment and horror and terror. And eventually when her dragon got, which in some respects, you could see dragons as lizard brain, the externalization of our lizard brain. And so one of the dragons that really was her safety and her sense of self was destroyed. She went on a vengeance. You know, she only had one dragon left, and they both were pretty angry, so they went after it. But yeah, I was curious what you thought on that. And I think the bigger piece that I wanted to mention that I don't think came out in this book, but there's been articles since where van der Kolk was very behind the CPTSD diagnosis in especially the DSM-5, and got a whole committee of people together to like really rally and lobby for this. But it feels important to acknowledge that like the overall lore of why it didn't pass was because of the United States military and because of politics around not wanting to support the treatment for CPTSD because it was enormously expensive. PTSD has a very short trajectory of treatment. But unfortunately, the treatment for PTSD is actually counterindicated for the treatment of CPTSD. It actually exacerbates the symptoms for CPTSD when you try to do exposure therapy or thought changing exercises, etc., when people's nervous systems are habitually out of alignment with their emotions and their thoughts. So I think that there's just very few stages where I get to get up and shake my fist in the air and be like, this is like the biggest, most terrible cover up ever that makes us have to look at the entire military system and say, if we can't make room for repairing what we are intentionally causing as harm, it is a byproduct of war, but we are pushing people into shredding of self-experiences. And if we can't cover the financial reparation of that, then we have to rebudget everything. Like, what are we doing? We're just causing a much larger toxicity in our culture. And for the military to shut that down and have that level of influence on psychiatry and psychology, it definitely was one of the, I would say, top 10 things that made me leave the field eventually, because it felt like the corruption was so obvious, and there was a massive lineup of practitioners and researchers that said, you know, this is deeply unethical to not have this diagnosis. This is causing harm. And it was still left out. So I lost faith in the Bible of psychology, so to speak, from that whole thing. And I'm glad you brought it out as much as you could, but I think it's a paradigm shift for us to start to recognize that, you know, we all can get disrupted deeply by an overwhelming experience if we don't have the support systems we need to buffer that and recover from it quick enough before the next big stressor comes or whatever. That can result in at least temporary post-traumatic stress symptoms, if not long-term. But that is not the same thing as complex trauma. And the chronicity or the global disruption of how we anchor to our sense of self in our life that leads to the phenomena of CPTSD is, it's just dramatically different. It's like saying that having a cup of alcohol and calling it a pina colada means I had a vacation in Hawaii. Like they're just entirely different worlds. They're not at all equitable. And without recognizing that as a culture, we can never get to starting to find sustainable solutions for like eliminating. When we say let's reduce childhood trauma, that means that all those parents who are likely in periods of trauma and reenacting trauma, they need long-term treatments to reduce that. And then we're talking about a massive budget shift in prioritizing mental health. So, yeah, that's my little soapbox moment. Rah!
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I didn't know how close you were to that DSM 5 realization. So I'm sorry to hear that it was such a disappointment. I do think mental health is actually like the world's biggest crisis. Like we talk about, the asteroid that might hit in 2025 and, global climate change and pandemics and overpopulation. But, if we keep getting, mentally unfit leaders, seizing, mass, like nationally backed spheres of influence, we're going to just continue to spin our wheels, because it's like the field, went from just denial, like almost like a don't ask, don't tell, to, this wonderful realization that there is trauma and let's create treatments. But it's almost like it kind of just got stuck. Like there was a pushback that, hey, you got your handful of little diagnoses and medications and like be good with it, sit back down. And I would love to see, quantities of our national budget and GDP like reallocated to just better mental health and work-life balance, because these are the stressors that traumas come from. You have two parents that are struggling to make ends meet and burning their candles at both ends just to try to scrape by, and who suffers, right? Not only them, but the children that they're trying to care for. It's not a condemnation on the parents, because my dad was an orphan that never got adopted, and that life experience shaped me, because that was my dad. He didn't mean to cause harm. It was just that's how the hand that we're dealt when we're born. And to kind of recognize that there is this pathway to actually as a society, shift our paradigms to actually treat, things as complex, and not try to oversimplify. Gosh, how do we make that happen? I don't know the secret, but I fully endorse, any and all efforts to take the mental health, treatments in that direction. And I kind of stepped on the soapbox. So sorry for the rant there, because I'd love to get over to KT as well and hear what your thoughts are on Chapter 9.
I'm actually going to build on what Hay is saying about the military. There's a big controversy in the military brats, or children, people who grew up in the military with their parents in the military, on this very issue. I would encourage people to find the ACE survey and actually take it to understand a little bit more about what's going on here. What the military brats say is that having parents deployed in combat is as stressful as parents incarcerated in prison. There's a difference, because prison is socially unacceptable, whereas being in the military mission is a positive kind of thing. But the folks who are deployed to combat are actually more likely to die. So they're actually more at risk of death. Plus, you've got the military culture itself, moving around a lot and giving up a lot in order to support the person who is in the military. And they did some research on that and claimed that, no, it wasn't the same thing, incarceration and deployment in a parent. But I think they sampled current military children, where it's a little bit of a different environment. They're normally living in one place longer, and when their parent is deployed, they have ways to talk to that parent so they can FaceTime, for example. And I think that they didn't sample the people who grew up in the military in the 50s and 60s and 70s. I think if they had done that, they would have had different results. And so if you're going to be daunted by the cost of treating PTSD in military members or veterans, how much bigger would that mess be if you had to treat all those children when they grew up for complex PTSD? I mean, that just raises the cost even higher. And I don't know if the military was considering that, but I would be surprised if they were not considering it, for that reason. But anyway, I was just thinking what she was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just in case, I want to, if there's anyone watching that doesn't know the term military brat, that's the child of a parent or two parents that are serving, right? So like the life of a child kind of from one parental assignment, to the next.
Yeah.
And the moves and the other experiences that brings.
Yeah, there's a famous meme which shows a bunch of cardboard boxes and a kid in the middle of them peeking out over the edge, and it says, "The military brat caught in its native habitat." It's kind of a symbol of that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I never thought of that. Like all the unpacked boxes that probably just go from like place to place. And yeah, like it's really such a bummer that we'll create so much national debt to, exercise these sweeping like diplomacy goals or even to go to war, but then when these families that are impacted by that war, come back through these peaceful times, we're not doing the swords to plowshares. We're just kind of moving on, and thanks for your service. That's a really great connection. That not only is it insurance companies lobbying, against these more, kind of complex treatments. Complex PTSD also means complex treatment, right? So, gosh, yeah. Yeah, and I know we talked about the kind of the sociopathy like it takes to sometimes like excel at leadership, because you are sort of grinding up human capital for the good of the company. And it's like that's another flaw. Like, I'm not anti-capitalist. I don't ever want to say like I'm anti-capitalist, because I understand the idealism of the system, but over time, like, those are the families that generate wealth, right? As these kind of like, narcissistic, sociopathic, or at least people were willing to turn, a blind eye to the lack of, work-life balance and fairness. And, that's where we're consolidating the wealth as a society, is these people willing to just treat everybody like productivity numbers.
Yeah.
So, gosh.
And I would echo that the lore in leadership management is the same about CEOs and psychopathy. That is definitely supported from the management side as well as the psychological side.
Yeah, I once saw a documentary that kind of took the Citizens United a step further, and they actually diagnosed corporations like as people, like gave them personality profiles, and a lot of them rated as psychopaths. It's I just
corporations
it doesn't
have empathy.
Exactly. It's very profit driven at all costs, and And just speaking out against it doesn't mean like I'm against it. It's just, can we reform it? Can we add like the human element and just have more balance?
People in
You know?
businesses can have empathy.
Hmm. Yeah, I do love to see that because it's not black and white, right? There are corporations and people doing extraordinary things with the same values of capitalism, and I think they're shining examples of how it can be. Let's scale it up. uh, and yeah, sorry to keep you waiting too, Jenny. I hope you still have your comment to share. Really love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's amazing that we're kind of dovetailing off capitalism, because that's exactly what my point was going to be about. I myself deplore capitalism. I think that it brings out the worst. We kind of glorify it for its merits, saying that the people will, whoever is doing the best jobs, get ahead. But time and time again, we see that greed and ego can quite well bring about the exact opposite. We see people at the top who do very little except look down on the people that actually keep the company alive, and they tend to make the most money. And capitalism puts money as a value. And money is such an abstract thing that it really doesn't hold any value. It holds whatever value we assign it to be. It's so abstract. And without having something concrete to base an entire economic ideology, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
we start like just like Carl was saying over here. He's trying to get ahead on the system that would actually value him. Well, the system, we're going to call it the business entity, whatever company he's working for. Sure, they value his hard work. They don't equate it with money. Money is not the same value as hard work, because many times people who do very little are very overpaid and have very little value inside the business. But because they are ahead, that's the position that they got into. Now, when we start talking about people, like when we start talking about humanitarianism, we caring for people, the corporation values what the people can do for the corporation. So it's almost like the corporation is put above the value of the people. And it's not equated with your value to the company is not equated to the money that you make.
Mm-hmm.
Many times, especially in my past, I've worked for bosses that were egotistical. They took pride in what they made the company being, when many times I would know more about the business he's running than he did himself, because he would make very bad business decisions, and especially in front of customers. His ego or his anger would get in the way of what would actually help the business. And a lot of people along my level would keep the business alive, despite him owning the building, However, he's the one that drove the Cadillacs, had the big nice car, and et cetera, et cetera. So we tend to value in a capitalistic society the business over the people. And I think that, yes, capitalists have their ideals, that it is a grand system based on merit, that the more you bring to the table, the more successful you can be. But unfortunately, because of people's ego and greed, it becomes quite the opposite. It becomes a very abusive system that doesn't take care of the people that hold up the capitalist system. And I just wanted to throw that in as my humble opinion.
Yeah, absolutely, and well said. And also, I know the capitalism and the problems and the mental health, like the impact at the scale of industrialization like has on mental health. It kind of came up a little bit later in the discussion. I'm curious, did you have any thoughts or shares too that were sort of like before that part came up? Because I know that's the super sore spot that got priority.
No, actually, that's why I opened it up with it. It's amazing that kind of just led to my turn sharing, because that's exactly what my topic was about.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Because I mean, this is kind of the difficulty that I have with capitalism is it kind of like runs away. Like capitalism doesn't really have a self-correcting mechanism. And, there's this mythology that free markets like correct themselves. And like I kind of, the metaphor I like to think of is like if you're driving a car down the road, like you're doing millions of little micro adjustments. Like if you're driving like between two states, like to get there, you don't drive in a straight line. You drive in like 300,000 like little micro turns in order to stay on that highway. But like what capitalism would do is like they would start on the highway, and then as they drift off the highway, they would just install like big saws on the front of the car, kind of like the Mach 5 and Speed Racer, and just be like, all right, whatever's in front of them, so just gonna like mow it down, and then oh, there's a subdivision on the other side of that forest. Well, I guess the saws work on houses too, so it's like there's just this lack of reining in impacts, that things can have. And, that's where I just think like we just don't seem to have the answer to the checks and balances, because it can work. I mean, we've seen elements of how it can work. But the problem is the idealism it takes for capitalism to correct itself, like doesn't exist in human behavior. Like you can't depend on that. So I really think like a renaissance of mental health, would, kind of correct the issue, like just through the knowledge of like, why are we kind of treating the workforce like in this kind of human capital way, and, kind of introduce those elements of correcting, taking the good things that are working and, using the spoils of that to correct the things that aren't working. That seems to be a blind spot that I don't have the answer for. Obviously a lot of people say unions, and I'm also behind that, but at a certain point, the unions also become the organizations that they were built to fight. And I saw a lot of that through, my father's membership in a union. So like, I still do think they're the answer. It's an imperfect answer to an imperfect situation. The best way forward. So I'm not knocking it in that way.
I would like to add to your car analogy that it's people pushing the car to get where it needs to go.
Oh, that just completely altered my mental image, and it's so spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, even the Fred Flintstone, like little feet out the bottom, everybody except the driver, right? The driver's just driving
Yeah.
with a Frappuccino.
I like the idea of unions too, but unfortunately, where you have uncompassionate people, you're going to have an uncompassionate system, no matter what it is.
Yeah, it seems to me in my life experience, and I'm still like learning, but like anything that creates a sphere of influence is eventually filled by somebody that wants to abuse that influence. So anything that kind of comes up to fix, like ultimately becomes part of the problem. and I don't know how to fix that particular part of the issue. Is we just have this human nature where people can't avoid like abusing power.
I say this with much heart and compassion as I can. People suck.
I love that bumper sticker. I still see it every once in a while. The people suck bumper sticker. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Appreciate
Yeah.
the diversity, though. If it didn't exist, then we wouldn't know the opposite side of it. So you kind of have to see that color black to appreciate the white, and
Mhm.
sunshine to appreciate the night, and et cetera, et cetera. But still, not everything we see is good for us. It's just we have to recognize what is good for the system and what is good for the people. And to
Mhm.
have the healthiest system, you have to have the healthiest people to prop it up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, eventually it'll just collapse. Like
Yeah.
the motorcycle store that I left, I'm hearing
Mhm.
rumors now that a lot of the original people that have moved on, and the place is just very angry. And that's
Oh.
not coming from past workers. That's actually coming from recent customers.
Gotcha. Yeah, good move. Dude, it looks like the writing was on the wall there. That was definitely a good move, and I'm still holding out hope for like a renaissance. We've gone through like major like worldwide like renaissances before, and maybe they come upon us like quicker than we really allow ourselves to believe. Um, and I'm still thinking, and like every little act of kindness is like fuel for that to happen. So I'm just so grateful for people like you that just put that kindness forward, and yeah, let's keep doing the work and see
Yeah.
what happens.
Maybe one day kindness will be the norm if people see enough of it.
Yeah. Yeah, kindness and self-actualization, that's kind of like what it seems to be about.
Mm.
And yeah, KT, I got your hand up there. If you if we didn't knock the comment out of your short-term memory there. Sorry
No,
about
no,
that.
not at all. I agree with you 100%, and I've had this conversation in many MBA classes. This is a very standard topic to address in business training, and the idea is that a business is there to increase the wealth of the owners, stockholders or whoever the owners are. That's the point of a business. And we shouldn't really expect much more of the business. But what we should do is create a set of regulations that the businesses all of them must operate inside. And that can actually level the playing field. And, the unions is the idea of the checks and balances, just like we have three parts of government. But again, any big organization can become abusive. And I agree, people suck, but part of it is because of the child abuse and the lack of training and parenting. So yeah, a whole big part of this equation is the people themselves. But in business, what we look at for the solution is to have, well, at least in a lot of areas, but there are different, just like in psychology, there's a different theories and different groups in business, but a large number of the business theories are about put the regulations and strictures and objectives in from the government, and you can see the impact of this approach in Europe. So in Europe, they mandate 30 days leave. They mandate that you can't work people too much in overtime. And so they put a lot of the structures in place, and we can see that they have longer lifespans and, so much better health outcomes. So that's a living experiment in how this can work if we would agree to do that. It's just too many people want the wealth the enormous wealth, the kind of wealth where you can never spend more than you're making, kind of thing, and the disparity in wealth that is I think the structural problem in society as far as the businesses go. And we could move in a more humanistic direction. Unfortunately, with Citizens United, guess who's funding all the campaigns? Guess who's electing all the politicians? Guess who's telling them what legislation to write? It's the people who are only after money, the special interest types. But it doesn't have to be that way. But I totally agree with what you guys are saying about capitalism. I'm just saying there are solutions out there. It's just we're not deploying them in the U.S.
Yeah. And also the connection to the mental health aspect, because like with so much rampant, like untreated childhood trauma that the book is disclosing, through these different research, you're getting statistics of 25% of people have been like physically abused as a child that are coming into these obesity clinics. Now, that's going to come down when you open up to a more general population, but that's still a staggering number of, people growing up with abuse. And, how many of these people kind of untreated and undiagnosed get into fields like politics and becoming an attorney or a judge, and they're implementing this kind of corporate and judicial and government influence through this lens of untreated trauma, and I think that's how it becomes like a cycle. Is now they're unintentionally, through no fault of their own, because they grew up in this circumstance that never got recognized, are implementing scales of magnitude of harm, and that just ripples out to the rest of the society. And that's why I think mental health is so crucial to our future. And I think I saw a hand come up from Haya, but we got Jimmy's name up on the board there too. Did that shake something loose for you, Jimmy?
Yes, actually, it's a point that I meant to make aside what I was talking about earlier, and KT kind of jogged it loose.
I apologize. I have to go, but I just wanted to remind you to let people know about next week. And I'm sorry, I had a hard cutoff here. So keep going. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to.
I'll be sure to. No, thanks for the reminder, because I was in the process of forgetting. I will disclose that. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, Haya. The cost businesses put forth into the well-being of their workers. So there's a lot of preventive maintenance. We agree that preventive maintenance would be a lot better than treating something that's developed into a problem already. But I think most businesses know that preventive maintenance is going to cost, whereas it might turn into a problem. It may or may not be a problem later, even if the person who develops the problem even decides to have it checked in on. Maybe they don't know that they can have it checked in on. Maybe they don't know that they have been wounded in such a way. So for a business to not have preventive maintenance to someone's mental or physical health is just saving them money for a problem that, even if it does show up, the worker may not act upon it. Even though it's not great for the people, of course, that's not what a company is concerned about. That's all I wanted to add.
Right. True.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the secret is finding the way to insert that level of care somehow. because, just like Carl's post is like beginning to recognize that work is really assigning like too much. Like, I mean, all jobs are stressful, right? If they weren't stressful, they wouldn't have a salary. Because, no one would do it for free. But there is like a limit of human capacity to process tasks.
Yeah.
And, I think there's lots of situations that you're describing where, people are just getting overtaxed and there's no real system of reeling that in. So we're left to our own capacity for not only recognizing it, but then like speaking up and setting boundaries and negotiating, or even leaving if that has to be the final like fix for being overworked. But as the book shows, you can go through life without the recognition that's actually happening. And yeah, I'm really glad it came up to this degree, because I think it's good to kind of bookmark the level and the systemic side of the dysfunction that not only comes from, but perpetuates. So yeah, good. I'll also, while I'm remembering, because Heya reminded me, is so the Bridgemakers group has kind of a procedure for events where they run for 10 weeks, 10 events, and then we put it on a pause to do like a little bit of a reflection and see if there's something we can improve or adjust. Maybe we don't adjust anything, but maybe we learn a couple of things and we sort of incorporate them. So I'm going to put out some way to gather feedback from the event, which is not mandatory, but if you do have some thoughts or ideas on how the event's going and if there's anything that can add more comfort or value. But that period's going to be actually 4 weeks. So after next Thursday's Body Keeps the Score event, we're going to pause for 4 weeks, for 2 reasons. One is the improvement that I mentioned. The other is that, this is a topic that kind of takes a lot of emotional energy. So like just a nice little gap to recharge and kind of look forward to the second half of the book. So the plan is that after next Thursday's event, we'll do a pause and then resume in the middle of May for the next 10 chapters of the book. So I almost forgot to disclose that, and I'm glad that Heya remembered me, because I know that'd be a bit of a shocker in next week's event. So I'm glad I got to speak up on it while we were all still here.
I'm glad that you will get a break as well.
Yeah.
I do appreciate these events, but I know that it does take time away from you and Grace. So thank you for devoting some of your time to share this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I will get to enjoy that time with Grace. And I know Grace appreciates y'all too, because, this is a really deep and enriching way to explore the topic. And, I get to learn things that I start practicing, in my own daily life. So, I'm getting better through all of, your presence and thoughts too. And well, yeah, with that, we're coming up on the 90-minute-ish mark, a little bit over. But before I kind of jump out and turn the volume back down, does anybody have any last thoughts that itching to share or came up? Okay, yeah, it looks like that's a good place to pause the event until next week, and see you then.
Thanks, God.
Thank you.